Can you hear me? So, technology. One of the things, this is what generally I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover why classification, why it's important, why I think it's important, but also I didn't really want to get bogged down with technology. We've been talking about GDPR for how long? How many people have heard about GDPR? How many people, keep your hands up, how many people are bored with GDPR, right? Okay, and this is the issue, right? And how many people have heard technology vendors say that they can fix their GDPR problems? Yeah, well, apart from Veritas, nobody can, no. The reality is GDPR is not a technology problem. GDPR has nothing to do with technology. GDPR is about process. And I think that's the first thing that we need to sort of the guys obviously understand. It's about process. And actually the technology should only support that process. But if you've got the wrong processes in place, it doesn't matter what technology you have, you're not going to be compliant. Does that make sense? So that's I mean, really, if it doesn't make sense, I'm glad it does, because if it doesn't, you should be next door listening to the legal team about why that's important. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about how we take the processes and we make them relevant to the end user. Is that okay? Are you here for the wrong thing? Okay. Oh, I'm going backwards. There we go. So a little bit about BOLDON James. Who's heard of BOLDON James? One person. And it's probably because you came across to our stall about half an hour ago. I don't know. No, you've heard before. This is good. By the way, I'm not embarrassed about that at all. I've worked with BOLDON James for just over 4 months. Previously, I'd never heard of BOLDON James, right? And I work in the sector, right? Never heard of them. And I'm thinking, why? And I'll tell you why. We are a small company. We're part of a massive company, a company called Kinetic, which you may have heard of. Kinetic are this multi-billion pound defence company. So any time there's a defence contract, or any time you're working with NATO or working with the armed forces, Kinetic are typically involved somewhere, right? So so why did they acquire BOLDON James? So they bought us, and they bought us because we were really successful we've been around in the classification and data security industry for 32 years, very, very quietly, just being incredibly successful. Without a lot of marketing. You might have figured that one out, right? So marketing is not our strong point. Actually, by the way, this is being broadcast, and I suspect our marketing team are looking right now. I love marketing; they're fab. So, so the problem is, so our heritage has been around for over 30 years. 32 years of secure messaging. So all of the navies, armies, air forces, all of those guys are using our technology. And so we're bringing this technology to the commercial space. Why classification? So why does it matter? Now, this is going to I'm just going to reinforce what the guy from Veritas has said. This is so important. There's so many data challenges today, right? We have the unstructured growth. I'll give you an idea of that. About the growth of unstructured data. For 90% of all of the data, that you have right here today, 90% of all of the data in the world was created in the last 2 years. That gives you an idea of the growth of data that we've seen. So every single bit and byte, 90% of it was created in the last 2 years. And of course, we know about regulatory pressures. I'm going to try not to say GDPR for the rest of the presentation, but you know this shit's happening, right? You know this is happening. And the fines are going to be huge, and the cost, blah, blah, blah. And not only that, is the way that they're enforcing it is different. And this is the real key part of it now. So in the past, look, we've always had data regulation, but it has never been effectively enforced. And that's the bottom line. So now every large organization has to employ these DPOs, data protection officers, or people responsible who report into Brussels and have to prove compliance. And that's another big change. Because in the past, you didn't necessarily have to prove compliance, you just had to tick a sheet. But now you have to prove that you are compliant. And we'll talk about what that actually means. Remote working, okay? Anyone from IBM here? IBM invented remote working and now try to uninvent it quite quickly. But the reality is, remote working is a double-edged sword, right? Because what happens when you remotely work? You're suddenly, as a company, as an organization, you lose a certain amount of control. And it's about how do we still sort of maintain that control of data. And dark data, and the rot data, the redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. That data berg that was shown earlier is absolutely spot on in terms of the challenges and the issues we have with data. So what do Bolden James add to the equation? Before we talk about that, has anyone ever seen this slide? Yeah? Every vendor I know has some version of this slide, right? And you know what? I both hate it and love it in equal measure. And I'll tell you why I hate it. I hate it because, you see Dave here, he's pictured as an idiot, okay? Dave's an idiot, okay? But I tell you who the idiot is the person who put all of that technology in place without even thinking about the consequence to Dave, okay? How much money has this cost the company and how much money does this cost the company? These are the things we have to be really important about. So let me tell you that Dave is not the problem. Dave, ridiculous name, is the solution. And I'm going to show you why that is the case. So Gartner, Forrester, whatever report you read, you'll see steps that they say are important in how do we protect the critical data within our organization. And you'll see that identification, discovery, security, and monitoring are all very, very important. I'm not going to ask if any of your organizations have encountered a security breach, because I'm sure you haven't, right? But when you think about a security breach, what do you think is the first thing that many, many customers think they have to do? They shut that, we have a saying, they call it shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted, right? So what happens is there's a security breach, and then many of our customers think, or there's a risk of a security breach, and many of our customers think DLP, data loss prevention, that is the way forward, that is going to stop us having another data breach. Just in the last few weeks, I've gone out around my territory, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I've spoken to many customers who are looking at DLP solutions. I'm not here to say you shouldn't buy a DLP solution. I'm saying you should. Yeah, DLP is a great set of technologies. But most of our customers, or most customers who are looking at DLP, and our future customers, understand there's a limitation. So they've gone out and they've invested in DLP solutions such as ForcePoint and others out there without truly understanding the context of the data that they're trying to protect. Does that make sense? So that's why classification is the glue. It's the glue that makes this work. Because if you can show the DLP engines, and if you can show the discovery engines what they're looking at, and they can do that quickly, then they can quickly protect it. So most customers who implement DLP solutions without classification have to put it into what we call monitor mode. So what does DLP do? It blocks. It asks you to justify. It can quarantine. It can do all this to protect your data. But the reality is, if you do that without knowing the context of the data, then what happens is it annoys, I'm being very good not to swear, it really annoys the end user because it stops them being productive. Does that make sense? Yeah? So this is why it's important to understand the context of the data that we're trying to protect. So what are the top drivers for classification? Just a quick show of hands. Who has a classification policy? I'm not saying tool set. I'm saying a policy within your organization. Yeah, pretty much most of you. In fact, those of you who don't probably do. Okay, you're just not aware of it. Okay, there is likely to be written, or someone knows somewhere within your organization how they should treat data, files, emails within that organization. Does that make sense? So there's going to be a policy written somewhere. And they do this because, obviously they want to have some sort of security awareness. But so these are the drivers. These are the drivers that push you towards data classification. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So what do we do? What do we do? We've already understood that the customer, you the customer, have a policy. The majority of you have a policy. And all we're going to do is link that policy with the end user. That's all we do. It's really simple. We don't pretend to be DLP. We don't pretend to be discovery. We are just the technology that links the policy, your classification policy, with the end user and makes it real. And there are a number of ways that we can do that. So in the past, it used to be sort of very much paper-based. Do you know what I mean? So someone would rubber stamp confidential, they'd stick it in a file somewhere, but nobody really does that anymore, okay? So then there's the automated approach. And the problem with a fully automated approach, where you go out and you look at the data and you think, oh, that's sitting in this silo here, so that it must be this type of data, so it must be classified, is actually, you get a lot of false positives. A lot of false positives. And that's why DLP struggles on its own without classification. But we do some of that. So we can, when a person takes a document, creates a document, we can scan for things like credit card details, national insurance numbers, addresses, and those sort of things, and suggest, or if you like, enforce, depending on the policies that you have, that they should save that document to a certain classification level, or they shouldn't be able to send that document out of the organization. So most of the stuff is user-driven. So let's go back to Dave, okay? Back to Dave. It's either how do you treat Dave? Do you treat Dave like that idiot in the corner who doesn't understand the value of data, doesn't understand whether data should be confidential, doesn't understand whether it should be internal use only? I don't think there are many Daves out there. And if they are, it's because they've been poorly educated in terms of how do they work with data. What a user-driven approach does, it allows us to actually start to change user behavior. So every time they create a document, or every time they save a document, they're asked, what classification level is this? And they can select the classification level. And they can decide. And who knows best the classification level of a document better than the person that created it? Does that make sense? I mean, that's certainly my viewpoint. And that's why, from a user-driven perspective, what you end up with is a more trustworthy end user. Definitely more trustworthy. And I'll give you some examples that you may not even have thought of. So we worked with a couple of large insurance companies worldwide, and we found, or actually the insurance company found, that after they had introduced a classification schema and then pushed that down through BOLDON James to make it relevant to the end user, they found that the clean desk policy, so apart from the classification thing, right, they found that the clean desk policy was actually working. Why? I'll tell you why. By the way, how this was implemented was that if they printed a document, it comes up with their name and the type of document that it is. They're not going to leave it on their desk. Okay, so this is part of the policies that we can introduce automatically. We also found that tailgating. Do you know what I mean by tailgating? So when someone who works in a secure building where you have to swipe cards to get through the doors, right? And what happens quite a lot, I do it, is that I can't be bothered to get my card out. I'll just follow this guy through, right? And we call that tailgating. We found that tailgating was actually reduced. How can that be? I'll tell you how it is. It's because what we do as a technology is modify user behavior. And we get them to think about security from day one in everything they do. When they're sending an email, when they're creating a document. And suddenly, security is top of mind. Does that make sense? So the knock-on effects of having this ability to get the end user involved in the security policy of the organization, in the security of the organization, and take ownership has had a really massive impact, and one that we didn't even actually foresee. But it gets the end user to take responsibility. And that's really, really key. Now, by the way, you don't have to run it like that. If you're the type of CISO or the type of organization that says, no, we don't trust the end user, then you can force them into certain classification policies, and that's absolutely fine. But there's sort of other things as well. Who's heard of insider threat? Have you heard that term, insider threat? This basically means that all of you and all your colleagues are likely to screw over your company at some stage, some point in time. Hands up who's going to screw over their own company? Oh, no one. Right, okay. So the problem with insider threat is actually when we look at data breaches and when we look at the type of data breaches that we've had, it wasn't down to insider threat. And I'm not saying that insider threat is not an issue. Okay, I'm saying actually the majority of data breaches that we've had haven't been down to insider threat. They've been down to human error. Dave, right? Dave, right? Now, that doesn't mean Dave's an idiot. That means Dave has got 15, 20, 30 other things he's thinking about, and he's not thinking about security policy. He's not thinking about classification levels. That's what he's not thinking. And the other thing is, there's a horrible feature in Outlook. Who uses Outlook? There's a horrible feature, this type ahead features. When you start entering an email address, it suddenly adds an email address that you didn't actually want on there. And let me tell you, I have sent an email to the incorrect person. And it's fine if it's within your organization. Can you imagine the impact if it's outside of your organization? Okay? This stops it. This stops it. So if you've marked a document as internal, it will stay internal. You try to type an external address, it will block it automatically. This is without DLP. This is without any other tool. Just out of the box, it will allow you to put those policies in place. It will stop you sending to a different domain. So if you've said this document is internal finance, it will not let you send it to marketing. Sorry, marketing. It won't let you send it there, okay? So this is the controls that we can put in place right from day one that have a really big impact in what we do. So we will finish with a quick product slide. But all I'd suggest that you do is go to the BOLDON James website or come and visit me on the stand and I'll give you the details. We can show you this. I can show you this in action and how it works. It's really simple. Here's a deal with this product. And by the way, everything marked with F is our foundation suite. So this is what we protect straight out of the box, and then you can buy additional modules. But again, it's a bit of an eye chart, so I can understand if you can't actually see it. But we protect all of your Office documents, including Visio and Project. We protect, if you've got, anyone got MacBooks? Yeah? No? Yeah, if you've got MacBook, you're lucky. Okay? Lucky people. Right? But I love Microsoft. But we also protect them in the Mac environment as well. So we can cover pretty much every environment very extensively. We can protect the endpoint, the end user phones. We have an add-in for your phone so that you can protect documents on the go there as well, anything you create there. So a very broad range of products. So we apply this visual marking, and this is where it gets really interesting. So we apply visual marking, as I probably inclinated a little bit earlier when someone printed out a document. It says confidential external, confidential internal. There's a watermark on that document. So we have that visual marking, but we have something else, and this is where it gets really interesting. So if you thought it was interesting before, or not, this is where it gets really interesting, because this is not a technology alone that's going to help you solve your regulation problems. I was going to not say that other acronym. This is going to help you solve those problems, because although we put a visual marking on there, we also put metadata behind it. Now that metadata can be picked up by Veritas, by Forcepoint, by Digital Guardian, by McAfee, by Symantec, by a whole range of vendors, a huge number of technology vendors. And then that metadata can be used to apply handling rules. So if a document is marked as internal confidential, then it needs to sit in a certain area of storage. We can get Veritas to move it there and make sure it's there and make sure it's kept there. Does that make sense? We understand, actually, that our little bit of code, is not that exciting on its own, okay? But the stuff that you can do with this code, once it's embedded, and the behavioral changes that it creates in the end user are really, really powerful. And we're not the only one who understand that. Okay, we have so many technology partners, and more joining us all of the time. And there's Veritas. He wasn't lying. It wasn't just because he stole my speaking slot. Okay, but there we are. Whatever technology we're working with, we will work with it, and that's really, really key. We don't try to be digital rights management. We don't try to be a DLP tool. We don't try to be a discovery tool. We help those things work. We help those things be really, really effective. Because I will categorically say, even with Veritas in the room, that actually a DLP solution without some form of classification, whether it's BOLDON James or another, and there isn't another, by the way. If you've heard that there might be another classification vendor, forget it. There isn't. Okay, we are the only one. But we make this stuff work. We make this stuff work really, really effectively. And there they are. You didn't ask any questions. Is it because I didn't allow you to? Is it because I spoke too quickly? But are there any questions? Is it because I just so fully answered your... Yeah? Is that why? Would you like me to tell you a joke?
Yes, we would like.
I only know rude ones. I better not.
Oh.
So, if you're at all interested in this technology, come and see me on the stand. I'm next to the woman with the chocolates and the wine. Perhaps you might want to go and see her afterwards. Come and see me. I'll take some literature. If you run out of literature, don't worry. I'll take your details and I'll make sure you get sent some stuff. Don't worry. If you give me your email address, it doesn't mean you've committed. Okay? It doesn't mean we'll be calling you up. Hi, would you like to buy some? No, that's not what it's about. Okay. Just want to emphasize this is really about behavioral change. It really is. This is where we see the biggest impact. And just the last thing that I want to say is that around GDPR, said it again, around GDPR is not a technology battle, it's a process battle. If you get those processes in place, there's plenty of technology out there to help you support it. But you need to get the processes right first, because if you don't, no technology is going to help you. Thank you so much for listening. Hope it's been useful. Thank you.
You-